Well, Macau, I think, is driven by a couple of factors. You got long-term factors, which is simply development of a gaming industry in Asia, which of course Macau is leading, and a lot of that comes from China. You had a lot of VIP players in the past, but you see more development of mass market product in Macau as well. And I think in the longer term, that's a very structural trend. Because it's a relatively young industry and it is geared towards kind of monetary conditions in China as well, that sector has been very, very volatile. People rush in and then they rush out. And we're probably just in a very strong bounce back in this regards at the moment. It doesn't mean that Macau is without risk as well. Chinese cities could eventually decide to build up their own casinos. And we already see across the region, Manila, Singapore, Malaysia, I think Sri Lanka is now looking at it as well, trying to hop on this particular bus as well. So it will be quite a volatile ride, up and downs. But structurally, it looks like an interesting growth industry. Yeah, there seems to be a recurring pattern in China over the last 4 or 5 years. Always the second half turned out to be much better. It's quite difficult to explain why this really is the case, but yeah, notwithstanding that, we've seen some better numbers coming out of China. It seems that China is responding quite positively to some of the fiscal adjustments and stimulus they put out over the summer. I think this is not just important for China, but it's important, one, for currency markets. We haven't seen the RMB slide, so it anchors and gives some stability to currency markets across the region. Secondly, it could be quite positive for other countries, particularly in ASEAN, and maybe for Korea as well, which export into China. And yeah, we've seen in some of these countries quite some pressure on the currencies. That might actually help some of these countries a bit as well. I think the biggest risk for China is still the large challenge of reform. The good thing is that China wants to reform and knows how to reform. A lot of books have been written about this. The World Bank did a phenomenal big study on what needs to be done over the next literally 20 years. I think the biggest risk is the implementation of that. How able are those who are willing to reform really to push through these reforms over the next years as well? And I don't think that's going to be a fairly easy game for them. It's difficult to measure at this particular point in time, but we do see signs that some of the Japanese money starts to trickle into ASEAN. I think, for example, in Thailand, they have a large car making manufacturing base already, and the Japanese also bought a couple of Indonesian banks over the last couple of weeks. So some of that we start to see to take place. And I think this is important because what happens in Japan and China has an impact on ASEAN as well. And I think for the moment, in particular with Indonesia, there's been a lot of focus on the current account deficit. My suspicion is that the current account deficit is probably peaked 1 or 2 months ago already, and that we're going to see gradual improvements in their external situation, and further inflows of FDI will, by the Japanese, might help them out, and the strength in China will help out a country like Indonesia as well, because they're a commodity exporter to China. So I think the situation there has a probability of actually improving faster than, for example, in India. And therefore, I think it's a market people should take a look at.